If you were standing where I stood, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent or walked away with dignity? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe. You're not alone here. I was hidden behind a linen curtain, standing beside a catering cart stacked with empty champagne flutes, when I realized the truth. Not suspected it, not feared it, realized it. The way you realize something irreversible, like a death or a betrayal so complete it rewrites your memory. A young server glanced at me with confusion, then pity, then quickly looked away as if my presence itself violated the order of the room. That was when I understood. I wasn't late, I wasn't early, I wasn't even forgotten. I was deliberately placed where I wouldn't be seen. The hall shimmered in soft gold light, white roses lining the aisle, familiar laughter rising and falling like music I once belonged to. A wedding, or something dressed like one. From where I stood, I could see the backs of guests, my guests, people I had cooked for, driven across state lines for, stayed awake for during divorces and diagnoses. I had aged alongside them. I had given my best years to this family, and now I was standing next to hired help, clutching a coat I was never meant to take off, listening to my own life continue without me. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 46 years old. I live in Los Angeles, California, and until that night, I believed loyalty was a language my family spoke fluently. I had come expecting to celebrate love. I had come carrying a gift wrapped in ivory paper chosen weeks ago, paid for with money I saved by skipping lunches. I had rehearsed a smile in the car, told myself to be gracious, told myself this night wasn't about me. I was wrong about that last part. The invitation had been vague. No +1, no assigned seat. Family gathering, it said. I assumed intimacy. I assumed warmth. I assumed, foolishly, that after everything I had done, I would at least be welcomed openly. Instead, a coordinator met me at the door with a tight smile and said, "Oh, you're here. We'll place you somewhere quiet." She didn't ask my name. She didn't need to. I watched the front rows fill. Reserved signs glinted under chandeliers. My brother Daniel stood near the altar, laughing too loudly, adjusting his cufflinks. And beside him was Rachel, my Rachel, the woman I had introduced as my fiancée less than a year ago, the woman who had held my hand through my mother's funeral, the woman who had promised me a future and then quietly reassigned herself to my past. No one told me, no one warned me. They let me arrive believing I still had a place. I searched my name on the seating chart. It wasn't there. I scanned again, slower this time, my finger tracing alphabetized lines. Nothing. I laughed under my breath, the sound brittle. Maybe it was a mistake. That's what loyal people tell themselves first. Then I overheard a voice behind the bar say, "She's not supposed to be near the family section. Daniel said it would complicate things." Complicate things. I pressed my palm to the counter to steady myself. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking, heavy and methodical, like it had rehearsed this fall long before my mind caught up. Another voice chimed in, lower, crueler. Honestly, at her age, what did she expect? This just makes it cleaner. At her age, 46, as if years of devotion wrought a woman into inconvenience. I drifted closer to the edge of the room, invisible by design, and listened as relatives spoke freely, assuming I was nowhere nearby. I heard my aunt say Rachel deserved someone more established. I heard a cousin joke that I'd always been too soft to fight for what I wanted. I heard my mother's best friend whisper that this was for the best, that I'd bounce back like a rubber ball, not a person. What they didn't say hurt more. No one asked where I was. As the ceremony began, memories flooded in uninvited. Late nights driving Daniel to college interviews after our father left, skipping my own graduate program to care for our mother when her hands started to shake. Letting Rachel move into my apartment when she said she needed space from her past. I had given so much of myself away that I mistook usefulness for love. I mistook proximity for loyalty. I mistook silence for respect. The vows echoed through the hall, distorted by distance and disbelief. Rachel's voice trembled, whether from nerves or performance, I couldn't tell. Daniel squeezed her hands the way I thought he'd never squeeze anyone's, tender, reverent. I wondered how long this had been happening. Weeks? Months? Long enough for everyone else to adjust, rearrange, and decide I was the inconvenience. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, clearer. A decision forming not from rage, but from self-preservation. When applause filled the room, I stepped forward, not toward the altar, but toward the exit. That's when my cousin Linda finally noticed me. Her eyes widened. "Margaret, oh my God, you're here?" I smiled. It was the most controlled thing I'd done that night. "Apparently," I said. She fumbled. We assumed." "I know," I said gently. "I assumed I wouldn't come, or that if I did, I'd accept being hidden." She glanced toward Daniel, who was now basking in congratulations. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said. And I meant it. For the first time in years, I meant something without apology. I walked out past the valet stand, past the floral arrangements I once had helped choose. The night air was cool, grounding. I sat in my car and let myself breathe. Not cry, not scream, just breathe. Because something inside me had died, yes, but something else had been born. I didn't go home right away. I drove the long way, down streets I used to take Rachel on when we talked about our future. I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep peace, all the moments I'd shrunk so others could feel larger. I realized then that humiliation is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. Erasure is. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was buzzing. Missed calls, texts, guilt trickling in now that the performance was over. I didn't answer. I didn't need explanations. I had seen enough. That night, I slept deeply for months, and when I woke, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't heartbroken in the way they expected. I was focused, calm, awake. I didn't tell anyone where I went after that night. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even the neighbors who waved at me every morning as if nothing in my life had cracked open. I moved through the next few days like someone learning how to walk again, careful, deliberate, newly aware of the ground beneath her feet. Every sound felt louder, every memory sharper. Betrayal does that. It strips away illusions and leaves only facts, raw and unforgiving. The messages kept coming. Daniel's voice note was the first one I deleted without listening to. Rachel's text followed shortly after. "We didn't mean for you to find out like this." I stared at that sentence for a long time, not because it confused me, but because it explained everything. They hadn't planned to tell me at all. I was never meant to find out. I was meant to fade quietly, like a misplaced object no one claims. At work, I functioned on instinct. Meetings, emails, deadlines, muscle memory carried me through. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. I was replaying moments from the past year, lining them up like evidence. Rachel canceling dinners, Daniel suddenly too busy to call, family group chats going silent when I spoke. None of it felt accidental anymore. It felt coordinated, decided. 3 days after the ceremony, my aunt called. Her voice was syrupy, careful. "Margaret, sweetheart, you left so abruptly. People were worried." I almost laughed. "Were they?" A pause. "Well, it was awkward." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," she said quickly. "You know how these things are. Emotions run high." "Yes," I said softly. "They do." She tried to steer the conversation toward reconciliation, toward understanding, toward forgiveness dressed up as maturity. I let her talk. I listened the way I always had, patient, accommodating, absorbing discomfort so others wouldn't have to. But this time something was different. I wasn't shrinking, I was observing. That afternoon, I opened the box Rachel had left behind in my apartment. Old letters, photos, documents she had asked me to keep safe because she trusted me. I had never looked through them before. Trust to me meant not prying, but trust had been broken and I was done protecting secrets that had cost my dignity. Inside was a folded envelope addressed to Daniel, postmarked 8 months ago. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. I had already crossed that threshold emotionally. The letter was intimate, familiar. It spoke of late-night conversations, shared frustrations, a bond that felt inevitable. It spoke of me, obliquely, as an obstacle they were navigating around, not a person they were betraying. I sat on the floor for a long time after that, the letter resting on my knee like a weight. 8 months. That meant everything they'd done, every smile, every reassurance had been layered over a lie. My engagement ring suddenly felt absurd, like a prop from a play I'd been performing alone. I didn't confront them, not yet. I needed clarity before chaos. I needed to understand the full shape of the betrayal, not just the outline. Over the next week, pieces fell into place. A cousin let something slip over coffee. A neighbor mentioned seeing Daniel's car outside my apartment late at night months ago. Rachel's best friend unfollowed me on social media without explanation. It was all there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for me to stop defending people who had already decided I was expendable. What surprised me most wasn't the pain, it was the relief. There's a strange freedom in knowing the truth. No more guessing, no more self-blame, no more wondering what you did wrong. The truth was brutal, yes, but it was clean. Then the invitation started. A family dinner to talk things through, a brunch to clear the air. Each message carried the same unspoken expectation that I would show up quietly, accept their version of events, and help smooth over the discomfort my presence caused. They wanted closure. They wanted absolution. They wanted me to play my role one last time. I declined every invitation. That silence unsettled them more than anger ever could. Daniel showed up at my door unannounced one evening, his confidence dulled by uncertainty. He looked older than I remembered, lines carved by choices he hadn't expected to justify. "We need to talk," he said. "I know, but we won't." His eyes flickered past me into the apartment. "Rachel's been having a hard time." I held his gaze. "So have I." "That night wasn't supposed to." I raised a hand, stopping him. "You don't get to explain my humiliation to me." He swallowed. "She loves you, just not the way you thought." Something in his tone, gentle, patronizing, lit a fire I had been carefully containing. "And you?" I asked. "Do you love me?" He hesitated. It was brief, but it was enough. "I did," he said. I nodded slowly. "Then you should leave." When he was gone, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote instead. Not a letter to them, a record for myself.
Dates, conversations, decisions. I wrote down everything I remembered, everything I had learned, not out of spite, out of respect for myself and for the woman I was becoming. Because here was the truth they didn't see coming. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning release. And sometimes release looks a lot like justice. A week later, Rachel finally called. Her voice broke the moment I answered. Apologies poured out, messy, self-centered, filled with explanations that made sense only if you centered her feelings above all else. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I believe you," I replied calmly. "You just didn't care enough to stop." Silence stretched between us. She hadn't expected that. She expected tears, accusations, negotiation. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. I looked around my apartment, the space I had built, maintained, protected. "Nothing," I said, "and that's the point." When I hung up, something inside me settled. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. I had stepped out of it. But they hadn't. Because 2 days later, I received an email from a lawyer, a request, a claim, a misunderstanding apparently regarding property, finances, shared investments. They wanted to renegotiate what they assumed I would quietly surrender. I smiled for the first time since the wedding. They thought my role was over. They didn't realize I was just getting started.
The email from the lawyer wasn't aggressive. That was the first thing I noticed. It was polished, neutral, almost courteous, like a door gently closing rather than slamming shut. They framed it as a clarification, a matter of records, a need to align expectations regarding shared finances and property. The language assumed cooperation. It assumed confusion. It assumed I would comply. Assumptions, I had learned, were the currency my family spent freely when it came to me. I didn't respond right away. I printed the email and placed it on my dining table, then added the letter I'd found, the bank statements Rachel once asked me to store, the old lease agreements Daniel had co-signed years ago when his credit was poor. I wasn't hunting for leverage. I was assembling truth. There is a difference. For most of my life, I had avoided documentation. I trusted people. I trusted intentions. I trusted that love kept score fairly even when paperwork didn't. That trust had cost me more than money. It had cost me authority over my own story. I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer of my own. Her office overlooked Wilshire Boulevard, glass and steel and quiet competence. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the timeline, the relationships, the sudden shift from family celebration to legal inquiry. When I finished, she leaned back and said something that startled me with its simplicity. "You're not reacting," she said. "You're recalibrating. That's good." She explained what I already suspected, that the investments in question were mine, that the apartment Rachel had contributed to emotionally but not financially was legally untouched, that Daniel's assumption of shared entitlement rested on nothing but familiarity. Familiarity, it turned out, had no standing in court. "Do you want to pursue damages?" she asked. I thought about it, about the humiliation, the erasure, the months of quiet collusion. Then I shook my head. "I want clarity," I said, "and I want boundaries." She smiled. "Those are enforceable." When I left her office, the city felt different, not brighter, truer. I walked past cafes where couples argued softly over lunch, past storefronts selling futures I no longer wanted. I felt oddly unburdened. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for what might happen next. I was preparing. That evening, the family group chat lit up again. A photo appeared. Daniel and Rachel at a beach in Malibu, arms wrapped. Captions about new beginnings. A few heart emojis followed.
A comment from my aunt about love finding its way. No one tagged me. No one addressed the absence like it wasn't a deliberate omission. I muted the chat. An hour later, my phone rang. My mother's best friend, the one who had whispered at the ceremony. Her voice was cautious now. "Margaret, I hope you're taking care of yourself." "I am," I said. "There's been some tension," she continued. "People feel you're pulling away." I laughed softly. "I was pushed," I corrected. "I'm just choosing not to crawl back." She sighed. "They didn't expect you to change." "Neither did I," I replied, "but here we are." Word travels fast in families, especially when the narrative shifts without permission. Over the next few days, messages came not to apologize, but to probe, questions disguised as concern, invitations framed as olive branches. I declined them all with the same brief response: "I'm taking space. Please respect that." They didn't. Rachel emailed me late one night. This one wasn't emotional, it was strategic. She suggested mediation. She proposed splitting assets fairly, implying shared ownership where none existed. She used words like amicable and closure and moving forward. She ended with, "I hope you can be reasonable." Reasonable. The word landed like a challenge. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and went to bed. The next morning, I woke to a message from Daniel that broke the pattern. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't polished. It was panicked. He asked if we could talk, really talk. No lawyers, no sides. He said he was scared. He said things were spiraling. I agreed to meet him in a public place, not out of compassion, but out of control. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the kind with neutral decor and no music loud enough to intrude. He looked exhausted. His hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around his cup. "You didn't think you'd take it this far," he said. "I didn't think you'd take it at all," I replied. He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "It always is," I said. "You just don't notice until someone stops absorbing the impact." He told me Rachel was struggling, that their families were questioning timelines, that people were asking uncomfortable questions about overlap, about loyalty, that the story they'd told about love blossoming unexpectedly wasn't holding up under scrutiny. "You could help," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "How?" "By confirming it wasn't, by saying you knew, that you were okay with it." There it was, the request beneath all the noise. They didn't want forgiveness, they wanted cover. I leaned back in my chair. "You want me to rewrite my own humiliation so you can sleep better." He looked away. "I want peace." "So did I said. "You chose differently." The silence between us thickened. Finally, he asked, "What do you want?" I didn't hesitate. "Distance," I said, "and honesty from now on." He nodded slowly, as if the concept was new. "Rachel won't like that." "I'm not negotiating with Rachel. I'm protecting myself." When I stood to leave, he reached out instinctively, then stopped himself. "You've changed," he said, not unkindly. "Yes," I agreed. "And you should be worried about that." 2 weeks later, the lawyer responded formally on my behalf. Clear language, firm boundaries, a refusal to renegotiate what wasn't shared, a request that all future communication go through counsel. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. The effect was immediate. Rachel's mother called, her tone sharp with indignation. She accused me of being vindictive, of punishing love. I listened until she ran out of steam, then said calmly, "Your daughter made her choices. I'm making mine." Friends who had stayed neutral began reaching out privately, asking for my side. I didn't badmouth anyone. I told the truth, simply and consistently. The truth, I discovered, doesn't need embellishment to travel. And then something unexpected happened. An email arrived from a relative I barely spoke to, a cousin by marriage who worked in event planning. She apologized for not intervening at the ceremony. She said she'd been told I knew. She said she'd believed it. She attached screenshots, messages from Rachel coordinating seating, instructing staff to keep me out of sight to avoid a scene. I stared at the evidence, my chest tight, not with grief, but with recognition. This wasn't carelessness. This was design. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blink on one by one. I felt grief, yes, but it was no longer consuming. It was instructive. It showed me where my loyalty had been misplaced and where my strength had always lived. They had underestimated me because I had spent years making others comfortable. They mistook kindness for weakness, silence for consent. They thought I would disappear quietly because I always had. They were wrong. The next move wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be cruel, it would be final, and it would come sooner than they expected.
I didn't plan to expose anyone. That part matters. I wasn't sitting at home plotting how to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. Exposure, when it came, arrived the way truth often does, through routine, through necessity, through people asking questions that could no longer be answered with lies. It started with a charity fundraiser. My mother had been involved with the foundation for years, and after her passing, I had quietly continued supporting it in her name. The annual gala was coming up, and I was listed as a legacy donor. Daniel and Rachel were also attending, newly married and eager to present themselves as a golden couple. I knew this because Rachel emailed me, not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to ask if I would be comfortable transferring the donor recognition to them to avoid confusion. I stared at the screen, incredulous. Even now, they wanted my silence to decorate their image. I replied with one sentence. The recognition reflects my mother's wishes and my contributions. I won't be changing it. The night of the gala, I arrived early, not to avoid them, but to ground myself. I wore a simple black dress, nothing dramatic, nothing apologetic. The room filled slowly, familiar faces, polite smiles, whispered conversations. People greeted me warmly, some with curiosity, some with guilt. I didn't fill the silence for them. I let it sit. When Daniel and Rachel entered, I felt the shift immediately. Conversations paused, eyes moved. The truth had been circulating longer than I realized. People had connected dots. Timelines had been questioned. What once passed as a romantic narrative now carried the faint scent of something rotten. Rachel avoided my gaze. Daniel nodded stiffly, like a man acknowledging an equal for the first time. During the program, the host spoke about legacy, about honoring those who had built something quietly and without expectation. My name was mentioned. My mother's name followed. Applause rose, not thunderous, but sincere. I felt it in my chest, steady and affirming. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel like an absence. I felt present. Afterward, people approached me one by one. Some apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner. Some simply said, "I'm glad you're here." I accepted each interaction without bitterness. This wasn't about collecting sympathy, it was about reclaiming space. Rachel's mother cornered me near the bar. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. She said, "You look well." I replied, "So do you." She leaned closer. "This attention, it's unnecessary. People are talking." "Yes," I said calmly, "they usually do when they learn the truth." Her eyes flashed. "You could still smooth this over." I met her gaze. "I already have, by telling the truth." She walked away without another word. The following week, the fundraiser photos went online. Nothing dramatic, no captions calling anyone out. Just images of me standing where I belonged, unhidden.
Comments poured in, praise for the cause, condolences for my mother, admiration for my continued involvement. Rachel and Daniel were in the background of a few shots, smiling stiffly, their narrative diluted by context they couldn't control. That was when the phone calls began. First from my aunt, then from a cousin, then from someone I barely knew. They weren't angry, they were unsettled. The story they had accepted was unraveling, and they wanted reassurance that it wasn't as ugly as it looked. I didn't offer reassurance. I offered honesty. Yes, I said again and again, they were together before the engagement ended. Yes, I found out at the ceremony. No, I wasn't told. The simplicity of it shocked people. There were no raised voices, no dramatics, just facts. Facts have a way of standing on their own. Rachel finally called me after seeing one of the posts. Her voice was brittle, stripped of her usual confidence. "Did you plan this?" she demanded. "No," I said. "I lived my life." "You're letting people think we're monsters." "I'm letting people think," I corrected. "What they conclude is up to them." She was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "You're punishing us." I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "I stopped protecting you." That distinction changed everything. Daniel sent a message later that night, not to argue, not to plead, to admit that things weren't going well, that the pressure, the whispers, the questions were straining their marriage, that trust, once broken in one direction, didn't magically regenerate. I didn't respond, because here was the truth I had finally accepted. Their discomfort was not my responsibility. Their consequences were not my cruelty. They had built their happiness on my silence, and when that silence ended, the foundation cracked. My lawyer called 2 days later to inform me that Rachel had withdrawn her claim entirely. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet retreat. It was over legally. Emotionally, it had ended long before. I celebrated not with champagne, but with sleep. Deep, uninterrupted sleep, the kind that comes when your nervous system finally believes you're safe. In the days that followed, I began making changes, not dramatic ones, just honest ones. I redecorated my apartment. I donated clothes I'd worn to please others. I said no without explanations. I said yes only when I meant it. One afternoon, as I was leaving a coffee shop, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older than I had a year ago. Not worn, seasoned, defined, like someone who had been tested and chosen herself. They thought dignity meant staying quiet. They thought grace meant absorbing harm. They were wrong. Dignity, I learned, is standing where you belong and refusing to disappear. And the final proof of that lesson was still coming. I thought the hardest part would be learning how to live without them. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to live without the version of myself who believed love required endurance. Once that illusion fell away, everything else began to align quietly, almost mercifully. The first real sign came not through gossip or confrontation, but through absence. The family group chat went silent. Invitations stopped arriving. Birthdays passed without performative messages. At first, I braced for loneliness, the way you do when you've been taught that family is the center of gravity. But the loneliness never came. What arrived instead was space, wide, breathable, honest space, where I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. Daniel reached out one final time, months later. His message was brief, stripped of drama. He said he hoped I was well. He said things hadn't turned out the way he imagined. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend himself. He simply acknowledged the distance. I read it once and set the phone down. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because closure doesn't always require dialogue. Sometimes it requires restraint. Rachel never contacted me again. I heard about her through others, though I never asked. About the tension, the distrust, the quiet realization that love born in secrecy struggles to survive daylight. About how the same traits she once admired in Daniel, his adaptability, his ease, now unsettled her. About how she felt watched, questioned, unsure of her place. I felt no satisfaction in this, just recognition. Betrayal doesn't end, it echoes. As for me, life simplified. I changed my routine. I took long walks in the early morning when the city felt like it belonged only to those willing to greet it gently. I started volunteering again, not out of obligation, but alignment. I traveled alone for the first time in years and discovered that solitude could be expansive rather than empty. One afternoon, I donated the engagement ring. Not sold it, donated it. I watched it disappear into a velvet-lined box and felt lighter than I had in months. Objects carry energy. I was done carrying that one. At the next charity event, no one asked me about them. They asked me about me, my work, my plans, my life. The shift was subtle but profound. I wasn't being defined by what I'd endured, but by what I was building. Late one evening, as I was organizing old papers, I found a photograph from years ago. Daniel and me at the beach, laughing, unguarded. I didn't tear it up. I didn't cry. I placed it back in the box. Memory doesn't have to be punished to be released. What surprised me most was how often people reached out privately, friends, acquaintances, even strangers, telling me my quiet response had given them permission to stop accepting erasure in their own lives. I hadn't intended to be an example, but when you choose yourself publicly, even without spectacle, others notice. That was the real justice, not watching them struggle, not being vindicated aloud, but knowing that my dignity had remained intact, that I had not become cruel in response to cruelty, that I had not traded my integrity for temporary satisfaction. One evening, standing on my balcony, watching the city settle into night, I realized something that felt almost sacred. They hadn't taken anything from me that I couldn't reclaim. Not my future, not my worth, not my capacity for love, only my willingness to tolerate less than I deserved. I was 46 years old, not invisible, not obsolete, not waiting. I was free. And that, more than anything they lost, was the truth they feared most. If you were standing where I stood, what would you have done? Would you stay silent or walk away with dignity? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe. You're not alone here.